The stairs of the old three-story building creaked underfoot as if protesting every step. The air reeked of dampness and cheap tobacco, and the walls bore stains no one had tried to scrub off in years. Kaylee stopped in front of apartment number 7, where the forensics team was already bustling around, and took a deep breath. Another body. The third this month. "Ready?" her partner, Detective Jason Marlowe, asked from behind her. "It's not the first time," she replied quietly, and pushed the door open. The apartment looked as though human hands hadn't touched it in ages. Peeling wallpaper, an old couch buried under a mountain of clothes, and a lamp that flickered in sync with the people moving inside. But the center of the scene was the man sprawled across the living room floor. Kaylee knelt down. The beam of her flashlight slid over the victim's body, illuminating what had become disturbingly familiar. "Oh, hell," Jason muttered. "Looks the same as the other two." Runes. A large and chaotic pattern burned into the man's chest, shoulders, and neck. Some were tiny and fine, others thick and rough, as if carved with something massive and red-hot. The lines were drawn so precisely, it looked like the work of a skilled artist, or an executioner. "No signs of struggle," Kaylee said, scanning the body. "The muscles are relaxed, as if he didn't even try to run." "Or couldn't," Jason added. "Maybe they tied him up?" "No marks, and the wrists are clean." Forensic specialist Laura Chang walked over holding a tablet. "The body is almost identical to the previous two. Same skin temperature, same burn patterns. But here's the strange part. The previous victims had mostly small runes. This one has several large ones." "Evolving?" Jason grumbled. Kaylee stared at the runes as if trying to read them. A month ago, she would have said this was the work of some cult lunatics. Now, there was something else to it. Something colder, systematic. "Any idea who he is?" she asked. "Identified as Tom Brenner, 38, no family, worked as a night loader at the port." "Just like the previous," Kaylee said quietly. Jason raised a brow. "Which of the previous victims worked at the port?" "The first one, Milton Gray, night shifts, the bridge by the waterfront. And the second, he appeared in the visitors' logs there a few times," she said, lowering her gaze to hide how well she remembered the details. "It's probably just a coincidence." "You said that like you don't believe yourself." "Because I don't." Jason sighed. "Kaylee, I know you're hooked on this case, but don't see signs where there might not be any." Hooked. He nailed that one. She thought about these runes even in her sleep. Woke up feeling like she was missing something. And as she looked at the body now, she again felt that this pattern was familiar, as if she'd seen something similar, but not in the reports. "Hey, take a look at this," one of the young officers called from the entryway. "There's something in his pocket." He pulled out a small piece of paper. On it, a single symbol. The same rune, but drawn in black soot instead of burned into the skin. Kaylee took the note, looked at it, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. "He left this for us?" Jason asked. "Or for someone else," she whispered. A window latch snapped sharply behind them. One of the officers turned, but saw no one. Kaylee lifted her gaze toward the dark alley outside. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow, a thin, tall figure sliding between the buildings. But she knew her mind often painted things that weren't really there. The morning was as gray as her thoughts. Kaylee entered the precinct before sunrise, quietly, unnoticed, the same way she'd been doing for weeks. The files on her desk lay in perfectly neat stacks, but inside her, chaos reigned. 3 bodies, 3 identical burn patterns, and the shadow she'd seen through the window of the abandoned apartment. "You're first again?" someone grumbled behind her. Kaylee turned. Captain Rouse, a folder under his arm and dark circles under his eyes. "Couldn't sleep," she said shortly. "Oh, I figured," he nodded. "Because of the Brander, right?" No one had officially given the killer that name, but in the precinct hallways, the nickname had already taken root. The Brander, the maniac who carved symbols into human skin. Kaylee tried not to react, but her fist clenched inside her pocket. Jason arrived half an hour later, holding a hot coffee he silently handed to her. "You look like you slept here," he said. "Nothing new," she replied, turning on the lights in the conference room. The wall was covered with a board full of photographs of the three bodies, diagrams, printed rune sketches, and a city map. Red threads stretched from the crime scenes to one shared point, the Port District. "I still don't see the logic," Jason said, taking off his coat. 3 different people, different places, different ages, and all with these, he pointed to a photo of the burns, pictograms. Seriously, this is ritual stuff. "But why are all 3 connected to the port in one way or another?" Kaylee countered. "Look, the first worked there, the second visited the area several times for shopping, and the third lived nearby and worked odd jobs there." "Maybe it's just a bad neighborhood?" Jason offered, though without conviction. "No, it's not a coincidence." She picked up the rune mark, the one from the third victim's pocket. "This one wasn't on his body. Someone left it intentionally." "Someone, or he did," a familiar voice said. Laura Chang stood in the doorway, holding a tablet and a steaming cup of tea. "Fresh analysis," she said as she entered, "and fair warning, it's weird." She placed the tablet on the table. On the screen were diagrams of the runes, some resembling ancient protective symbols, others completely unknown. "These symbols aren't in any of our databases, but these," she pointed at 3 similar marks, "they really do look like old protective patterns. They were used in purification rituals." "Purification?" Jason repeated. "You're saying he's like a priest?" "I'm not saying anything," Laura raised her hands. "But these marks aren't typical for ritual killings. They're defensive." Something clicked inside Kaylee, a thought that had been quietly smoldering for days. "What if he isn't killing them on purpose?" she said softly. Her 2 colleagues stared at her in silence. "You're serious?" Jason asked. "The runes are burned into people. They die in agony. What do you mean, not on purpose?" "I'm just saying, maybe we don't understand what he's doing to their bodies. This doesn't look like gratification. No mockery, no perversion, no signature. It feels like work, cold, systematic work." "You're implying he's healing them?" Laura asked skeptically. "I'm not implying anything. I'm just leaving the question open." Jason rubbed his forehead. "Kaylee, you're getting too deep into this." She didn't argue. Why would she? He was right. A sudden phone call cut through the air. Captain Rouse stepped out into the hallway, then returned a minute later, frowning. "We've got a new incident. Not a body, but very close. The Allaport, Dock 12. Some guy collapsed right on the worksite. His arms have bruises, shaped like the same symbols. They look like they appeared on the skin by themselves." Laura quietly cursed. "Damn, that's the first sign I'm a living person." Kaylee was already pulling on her jacket. "Let's go, now." Jason grabbed the keys and ran after her. The port greeted them with a sharp wind and the clang of metal knocking against metal, like the echo of some unseen machine. The lamps above the containers flickered, casting fractured shadows across the ground. It was well past midnight, yet workers still swarmed in uneasy clusters. Some smoked, others murmured quietly, but all of them kept stealing quick, anxious glances toward Dock 12, where ambulances and police cars stood. Kaylee was the first to step under the tape. Jason followed behind, his gaze sliding through the dark gaps between the containers. "I don't like this place," he muttered. "Not sure anyone should," she replied without slowing down. A port security guard, a tall man with a nervous twitch in his left eye, met them near the loading crane. "He's over there. Medics are still with him," he said, wiping sweat off his forehead despite the cold. "Just collapsed, and when we flipped him over, we saw that." Kaylee approached. On the ground, propped against the metal wall of a container, sat a young worker. Medics held him upright, trying to keep him conscious. He was breathing heavily, eyes darting as though he was trying to focus but couldn't. "What's his name?" Kaylee asked. "Harrison Boyle, 24, one of the medics replied. She crouched down. "Harrison, my name is Detective Kaylee Drake. Can you hear me?"
The young man drew a ragged breath, his voice hoarse. He touched me. Who? She leaned closer. Harrison slowly lifted his hand. On his skin emerged a faint pattern, rune-like lines, pale as if drawn by light from beneath the surface. They weren't ripe yet, not burned, but they were there. The darkness came for him, he whispered before losing consciousness again. Jason cursed under his breath. It's the same thing, the same marks. Damn it, Kaylee. But she wasn't looking at the boy anymore. She was staring at the ground. Where the dust should have been a dull gray-brown, there was a thin streak of blackish ash, the same kind that had been near the first and second victims, and in the third victim's apartment. And something else. A smell, like hot metal hitting cold air. Ozone, heat, and something almost electric. He was here recently, she whispered. Jason shot a sharp look. You can't know that. I can. It was the same in the apartment. The traces are still fresh. The port security guard, a tall man with a nervous twitch in his left eye, coughed uneasily. I saw someone. Maybe it's nothing, but he was standing between the containers, tall, too straight, like a pole, and when I blinked, he was gone, and it felt hot, like an engine kicked on right next to me. Where exactly? Kaylee asked. He pointed toward a narrow lane between two rows of containers. Kaylee started toward it immediately, not even waiting for Jason. Kaylee, wait, he called, but in a tone that suggested he knew it was pointless. She stepped into the tight corridor between the metal walls. The wind didn't reach here. It was quiet, too quiet, only the sound of her own breathing. A blade of cold anticipation slid down her spine. And then she saw it. On the wall of the container, black lines, thin, even, almost graphic. They had crawled along the metal, leaving dark trails behind. Runes. He had done this here, seconds ago. The brander, she whispered. And at that same moment, something faintly shifted deeper in the darkness. A figure? Or a shadow? Or just the wind? She strained to listen. Silence. Unnatural. Kaylee, Jason's voice cut sharply. They're taking him to the hospital. She stepped back a step, then another, and as she turned her head to leave, she noticed it. By her foot, on the ground, a small black mark, not ash, a symbol, drawn quickly, clean, precise. It hadn't been there a minute ago. Kaylee froze. He had left her a sign, and it meant only one thing. The brander knew she was here, and he had seen her. Kaylee stopped in front of the old antique shop wedged between two abandoned office buildings. The sign glimmered dully under the rain. Moonlit relics. It looked like the kind of place where reality blended with something forgotten. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air smelled of dried herbs, dust, and something metallic. Shelves were crowded with amulets, old books, crystals. The silence was so thick it seemed to swallow the sound of her footsteps. "Anyone here?" she asked quietly. From the shadows behind the counter emerged a man in his 60s, tall, thin, with a pale face and deep dark eyes that seemed to look straight through her. "You're Kaylee Rowe," he said, before she could introduce herself. "Detective. You've come because of the runes." Kaylee froze for a moment. "I don't think we've met." "We haven't," he smiled, though the smile felt strangely empty. "But I knew you'd come. The third body this month, and marks from the same hand." Her heart tightened. "I just want information. You said on the phone you recognized the symbols." "Yes," he nodded and pulled out an old leather-bound book. He placed it before her. "Most of them belong to a very old, very rare system. It was used by groups who believed one could weave shadows and life together." "Weave what?" she asked. "Shadows, souls, intent. They didn't just write runes, they created." He paused. "They called themselves shadow weavers. But among them was one who could do more, something far more dangerous. A cold shiver crawled up Kaylee's spine. And what did they call this one? The man looked into her eyes, as if weighing whether he should say it. The shadow thread weaver, the one who can stitch shadows into living people and take what he wants. Kaylee turned away, catching her breath. The name was too bizarre, too mystical, but the bodies were real. You think our killer is some kind of occult fanatic? Your killer is no fanatic, detective. He is a master. And if the runes on the last victim were imperfect, that means he's rushing. Someone is interfering with his work. You say that as if you know him. The man closed the book slowly. I know of him, and some things are better left unknown in detail. Kaylee sighed and reached out her hand. I need copies of these pages. I'll pay. I'll give them to you, but the warning is free as well. Don't try to understand him too deeply. Some shadows look back. She didn't respond. She simply took the inserted pages and slipped them into her folder. As Kaylee reached the door, the man suddenly added, He knows about you, Detective Rowe. Kaylee felt a tightness bloom in her chest. How do you know that? Because the runes are changing, and one of them, he sighed, as if the confession itself weighed on him. One rune has been activated. That only appears when the weaver has already chosen a new thread. She spun around sharply. A new what? A new part of his pattern. Someone who becomes an element of his work. Someone who stands in his way. The silence in the shop felt thicker than before. Kaylee stepped back out into the rain, clutching the folder. The wind felt colder now. Somewhere far off, sirens wailed, but she hardly heard them. The shadow thread weaver. He knows about her, and that meant the hunt had become mutual.
Kaylee sat in her car, her hands resting on the steering wheel, and for a few seconds she simply breathed, trying to gather her thoughts. The conversation with the antiquarian lingered in her mind like a dark stain, a rune of the required state, transformation, fracturing of will. She hated all that mystical nonsense, but now, no matter how much she resisted, part of her couldn't look away from it. Too many coincidences, too many shadows that protocol couldn't explain. A deep inhale, exhale. A glance in the mirror, tired eyes, red from lack of sleep, but steady, stubborn. Her phone buzzed. Dispatcher, District 14, we need a response team. Looks like a new incident. Riverside Motel, room 12. Silence for a heartbeat, and Kaylee felt something tighten inside. The 4th, this month. Copy, she said too quickly. So quickly she noticed it herself. The key turned in the ignition with a click. The engine came alive. She drove. The Riverside Motel was typically miserable. Peeling doors, flickering lights, the smell of mold and old smoke. Police tape fluttered in the wind. Jason was already there, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Jason, you got here fast, really fast. I was nearby, Kaylee said dryly as she stepped out of the car. He looked at her longer than usual, too carefully. You okay? I'm fine. Fake, but convincing for everyone except him. They went inside. Room 12 was cramped. The old AC hummed weakly. The window wouldn't shut all the way, and on the floor lay a man in his 40s, thin, worn-out features. The victim. Same story. But this time, one detail was different. The runes on his chest and arms were unfinished. The lines broke in the middle of the symbols, as if the killer had rushed. The edges of the burns were fresh, still glistening in places. If they had arrived a little earlier. Forensic tech. Time of death is no more than an hour ago, maybe less. Jason. Runes similar to the previous ones? Kaylee. Similar, but not completed. She crouched down, studying the thin carved lines. The same as the previous 3, only this time as if the victim wasn't prepared, or the markmaker had been interrupted. Forensic tech. And do you smell that? The air carried a faint trace of hot metal, almost identical to the one at the docks.
A cold shiver crept down Kaylee's spine. Jason, so any theories? Kaylee, he didn't finish the work. Jason, because someone scared him off? Kaylee, or he was rushing. Jason, you think it's him? Kaylee, yes. The team exchanged ideas, discussing standard explanations, a psychopath, a ritualist, a cult fanatic, but all of it sounded too grounded, too simplified, and Kaylee felt something inside her tighten. She no longer believed in simple explanations. She walked the room step by step, everything scattered, signs of struggle minimal, as if the victim lost strength before contact. And then she noticed something under the bed. A tiny piece of dark fabric, too dark, too dense, not from the victim's clothes. She lifted it with tweezers. Jason, another souvenir? Kaylee, this is different. This time he dropped something. The fabric had a scent, weak but distinct, the same metallic heated one like a spark from forged steel. A sign, a real one, not coincidence. Neighbor from room 2, witness. I heard footsteps, heavy, then like the air hummed, darkness in the hallway, and then something clicked, and silence. Kaylee froze. Clicked, like metal, like an instrument. Did you see the silhouette? Yeah, briefly. Tall, but kind of blurry, like it didn't want to be seen. Kaylee swallowed hard. Too familiar. When everyone left, she stayed for a minute alone in the motel corridor. Wind pushed through the cracked window, bringing cold air and the smell of old paint. And at the moment she stepped toward the door, her gaze slid across the floor. On the ground, just inches from the room threshold, lay a thin, dark streak, like a barely visible burned line. It couldn't have been there. 2 minutes ago, it definitely wasn't. Kaylee froze. This was a message, small, intentional. The markmaker hadn't just been here an hour ago. He had been here when she walked in.
The drive home was so quiet, it felt as if the whole city was holding its breath. Night fog drifted low across the asphalt, wrapping around cars and swallowing their shapes. Kaylee kept glancing at the rearview mirror. A silver sedan behind her repeated several of her turns. No coincidence. Just coincidence. But the chill creeping under her skin felt like a warning. When she turned onto her street, the sedan vanished. That didn't calm her. If anything, the feeling that it had escorted her to her door only grew stronger. The entrance to her building greeted her with silence. Only the flickering lamp above the doorway blinked in an erratic rhythm. The door was ajar, wider than usual. Kaylee froze for a moment, then drew her gun. On the stairs, dark gray granules, like ash. She nudged one with her toe. It crumbled, like scorched dust. He had been here. Her heart thudded slow and heavy, but she climbed step by step, professional, trained. Check the corner. Listen. Breathe. Her apartment door was cracked open too. Kaylee shoved it wide and stepped inside, gun raised. Police! Hands where I can see them! Something shifted in the hallway shadows. Then he stepped out. Tall, a black coat with a faint metallic sheen along the collar. His face partly hidden in shadow, but his eyes glowed with a warm, almost copper light. Not predatory, more observant, attentive, almost human. The markmaker. Kaylee clenched her teeth, keeping the gun level. On your knees, now. He didn't obey. Didn't even flinch. If I wished to harm you, he said low and unnervingly calm, I wouldn't have waited for you to come home. Shut up! He tilted his head, as if studying her. You're not afraid of me. I'll shoot you, she hissed. Try taking one step. The markmaker slowly raised his hands, not in surrender, more to show he carried no weapon. You don't understand who you're fighting, Kaylee. All I know is you leave dead bodies behind. I find the ones touched by him, the one who marks in black runes, the one you call the real killer. His gaze darkened for a moment. His name is Salvarius. The words sounded ancient, older than human speech. Fairy tales, you're lying to cover yourself. You saw it yourself, runes forming beneath the skin of the living. Their nature is not human. They feed, and once they've taken root, the person is no longer a person. Kaylee drew in a sharp breath. He stepped half a pace closer, just enough for her to catch that scent of hot metal mixed with something earthy, smoky. The darkness in the apartment seemed to tighten around them. Will you keep lying? Then why do they die? Why do your protective runes look like torture? He extended his hand toward her, palm open, revealing an old, half-erased rune glowing faintly with a fiery tint. Because they come to me too late. A sudden sound on the stairs. Someone was hurrying up. Kaylee spun sharply, raising her weapon, but felt a strong hand close around her wrist and pull her gently aside from the window. The movement was quick, but not violent. Their faces ended up startlingly close, inches apart, their lips separated by a breath. He edged a little closer, softly, warmly. He already knows about you, the Markmaker whispered. Salvarius senses those who touch his traces, and now you stand in his way. For a second, something sparked between them, strange, alarming, magnetic. Her hand suddenly stopped trembling. He released her just as quickly as he had taken hold. You must choose, detective. Follow the truth, or look away and let him claim new bodies. And before she could raise the gun or shout, his shadowed coat vanished into the darkness of the hallway. Only a faint scent of ozone remained in the air. Kaylee stood motionless for several seconds, her heart hammering wildly. She looked down and saw, by the threshold, a small black symbol drawn with a single decisive stroke, a protective rune. She whispered into the empty apartment, "Who the hell are you?" Kaylee returned to the precinct much later than she'd planned. The corridors had long since gone quiet. Only the occasional footsteps of night shift officers cut through the stillness. She stopped in front of the evidence analysis room, drew a long breath, and only then stepped inside. Brenner sat at the table, hunched over a monitor. His shadow stretched across the wall, making him look like a giant. He jerked his head up when he heard her steps. "Finally," he muttered. "I was starting to think you'd gone off chasing phantoms alone again in the middle of the night." Kaylee managed a slight smile. "Just got held up. Protocols, paperwork, you know how it is." He didn't believe her. She knew he didn't, but at least he wasn't prying. Not yet. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. On the surveillance footage from an alleyway tunnel, a shapeless shadow moved. Its motion was strange, jerky, blurred for half a second at a time. A dark silhouette that made the camera flicker with static distortions whenever it passed. That, Kaylee leaned closer. Glitch? That's what I thought, but no. Every time this figure appears, the distortion shows up, like something is interfering with the electricity itself. Brenner slowed the footage down. Now watch closely. For a few frames, a pattern appeared. A symbol. A rune. Kaylee's heart jumped painfully. That same shimmer, that faint glow only she seemed to notice. "You see something?" Brenner asked. "No, just bad quality," she murmured, looking away. She was lying, again, and again it hurt inside. The call came a few minutes later. Another victim. An apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood that hadn't seen repairs in decades. The stairwell reeked of rot and cheap cigarettes. As the team moved in, neighbors peeked from behind their doors, as if the killer was still somewhere nearby. The body lay in a small bedroom cluttered with old newspapers and boxes. Unlike the previous scenes, this room was a disaster. Overturned chairs, a torn curtain, blood on the wall. "She fought," the forensic tech muttered. "Hard." Kaylee stepped closer. The runes were there, but what she saw beneath the collarbone, that hadn't appeared in any earlier case.
The symbol looked as though someone had tried to tear it out, but it burned deeper than the skin, almost into the bone. "New?" she asked quietly. The forensic specialist nodded. "Haven't seen this design. This isn't the work of some ritual copycat. I don't know, maybe she tried to rip it off?" Kaylee traced the lines with her eyes, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. The pattern, it pulsed, fresh, almost alive. And then she felt something else, a warm, barely there presence. She'd felt it before, at the first scene, the second, but this time, stronger. "It was him," she whispered, not realizing she'd said it aloud. "Who's him?" Brenner tined toward her. "No one," she corrected herself too quickly. "I mean, the killer." Brenner gave her a long, careful look. "Kaylee, are you sure you're all right?" "Yeah, just tired." Another lie. When she stepped out to the stairwell to catch her breath, something rustled in her jacket pocket. She stopped. Her hand slid inside slowly. A note. A tiny scrap of paper with a protective rune on it, the same kind she had seen on the mark maker. And on the back, 2 words, "Stay away." Kaylee crushed the note in her fist, nearly ripping it. So he had been close, watching, and apparently protecting her, or trying to. She didn't know how to feel about that, but something warm stirred inside her, familiar, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. She returned to her car, trying to gather her thoughts. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. A message. "You've been marked." Attached was a photo, a picture of Kaylee, taken a few hours earlier as she left the precinct. Behind her, on the concrete wall, a faint shadow of a rune was visible. The same rune she had just seen on the victim's body. The symbol belonging to Salvarius, the one everyone called the Rune Carver. Kaylee froze. The Rune Carver wasn't just hunting. Now, he'd already made his move, and that move was her.
Kaylee sat on the edge of the bed, gripping her phone so tightly her fingers were going numb. The photo with the rune that Salvarius had sent glowed on the screen, shimmering with a cold blue light, as if it were watching her. She set it aside, but the sense of presence didn't fade. On the contrary, it grew stronger. The room, which had always felt safe, now pressed against her chest like a closing fist. "You're not afraid of the dark, Kaylee," she whispered to herself, but even her own voice sounded unfamiliar. She closed the curtains, turned off the light, as if trying to hide from the world. Yet the more she concealed herself, the stronger the feeling became. Someone was watching. Someone was tracking her. Someone knew. Then she heard footsteps outside the door. Quiet, slow, deliberate. Kaylee snatched her gun. The shadow under the door shifted to the side and froze. "One more step and you're dead," she hissed, raising the weapon. Silence answered for a single long second. Then a low, calm voice. "Don't shoot. I didn't come for you." She froze. The voice was familiar, though she had heard it only once, in the darkness of the port. The mark bearer. She yanked the door open, and the hallway light fell across his figure. He stood between the lamp and the shadow, split in half by the contrast. His hood had slipped back just enough to reveal part of his face, sharp cheekbones, a tense jaw, and dark eyes glinting not with coldness, but with worry. "You're breaking into my place again?" Kaylee hissed, not lowering the gun. "Explain what's happening." "He marked you," the mark-bearer said quietly. "Salvarius. Now he can see through any rune in the city. He sees you. You've become a beacon." Her heart clenched. "And you know this how?" Her voice was firm, though her fingers trembled just slightly. He lifted his hand. A runic line flared across his wrist. Soft orange light slid over his skin, warm, almost alive. "Because I can see what he does. I know when he touches someone, and when he hunts." Kaylee lowered the gun just a few centimeters. "Why did you come?" "Because you're in danger, and
He fell silent, but she saw his chest rise deeper than a simple breath. And because I need you, Kaylee. Something warm and dangerous tightened inside her. Need me? For what? Salvarius has chosen his next victim, and I can't find her alone. He's hiding his traces better than ever, but you are his light. He makes mistakes when he thinks about you. Her breath faltered. Using me as a bait? Great plan. No, his voice sharpened. I won't let him touch you, ever. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath. Her heartbeat jumped unexpectedly. His fingers brushed her palm, a light touch, but warmth rippled through her. Trust me just once, he whispered. If we want to stop the rune carver, we have to work together. A storm churned inside Kaylee, professional, moral, human. But in his eyes she saw for the first time not shadow, not danger, but exhaustion, and something tender, barely noticeable. Fine, she whispered at last. But first rule, don't vanish in the middle of the night. Second, explain what you're doing. All right, detective. He pulled out a small amulet, metallic, yet warm as if fresh from the fire, and placed it in her palm. Their fingers lingered longer than necessary. This will shield you from his runes, for a while at least. Where now? She asked. The mark-bearer descended into the courtyard and touched the ground. A thin runic line lit up and streamed into the distance, trembling with a golden trail. To the place where he left his call, he said quietly. To Salvarius. He looked back at her. Ready? Kaylee took a deep breath. Yes, together. And they stepped into the night, side by side, into the dangerous world of runes and shadows that from now on belonged to both of them. The night was unnaturally quiet. The wind that usually swayed the tall firs over the Syracor marshes had stilled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Kaylee and Brenner stood by the circle of ancient stones, where the runes glowed with a dim blue light, the only place they could lure Salvarius and strip him of his power. Brenner held a small artifact in his hand, a rune trap woven from 3 rare symbols. If everything went correctly, it would bind the rune carver's power long enough to neutralize him. Kaylee held a dagger with a protective rune that Brenner had crafted specially for her. His fingers brushed her wrist instinctively as he handed her the weapon, a quiet but sincere gesture of care. Ready? He asked, though he already knew the answer. If you're here, yes, she whispered. A shadow slipped between the stones. The air crackled. Salvarius appeared as if he had grown from the darkness itself. Tall, lean, his eyes glowing with runic fire. Runic chains shimmered across his skin, not ordinary, but alive, pulsing like parasites. "You've come to me willingly, children of the runes," he hissed, smiling. "How quaint." Brenner stepped forward. "This ends tonight, Salvarius. You will take no more lives." "Oh, Brenner," the criminal spoke with inhuman softness. "Healing? Salvation? I only offer choice to those the world has discarded. And you strip them of power so they die weak." Kaylee felt Brenner tense, but he did not stop. "You brand them and drain their life. I've seen your chosen. They live in me." The rune carver touched his chest. "And because of me." Salvarius struck first. A runic explosion tore through the space, bathing everything in blinding light. Kaylee managed to shove Brenner aside, but the wave hit her, throwing her to the ground, slicing her shoulder. Brenner lunged forward with a shout, forming a shield of runes. Salvarius collided with him, and their powers erupted in a harsh blue-red flare. "Kaylee, hold on!" he yelled, but for a moment he lost focus. Salvarius seized the opportunity. A runic chain, like a snake, lunged at Kaylee. It didn't fully latch, but it touched her, leaving a bright mark on her skin. The rune glowed ominously. Brenner paled. No. Rage flared in his eyes for a moment. He activated the rune artifact. The trap unfolded like a metallic flower crafted from runic lines. Salvarius, take me if you want the power. The criminal laughed. You want to bargain with this? Then the trap worked. Light erupted from the artifact, binding the rune carver like an icy cocoon of symbols. Salvarius shook and screamed, his runes extinguishing. Kaylee, barely rising to her knees, whispered, Close the third circle. Brenner understood. He touched the ground, traced the final sign. The circle closed, and Salvarius was sucked inside, bound completely. He vanished in a flash of darkness. Silence returned. The runes faded. Brenner immediately rushed to Kaylee. She knelt, clutching her shoulder, where Salvarius's tainted runes still pulsed. Kaylee, no! His voice broke. I'm fine, she whispered, though her eyes trembled. He lifted her, holding her close as she faltered. I'll fix this. Hear me? I won't let you fade. She looked up, her eyes wet, brimming with the warmth she had held back for so long. Brenner, she whispered. Before he could respond, she drew him closer, and their lips met, passionately, finally, as if they had both been waiting for this moment their entire lives. He held her tighter, as if afraid to let go. The runes on the ground faded completely.